Well, with just 2 days to go to Burundi's presidential elections, human rights groups are now urging the United Nations to do more to ease the potential humanitarian crisis there. Well, Stephanie Wolters is the head of conflict prevention and risk analysis at the Institute of Security Studies. We chat to her now via Skype. Good afternoon, Stephanie. Are you with us?
Good afternoon, Krushni. I'm here.
Great to have you on the PM News Desk again, Stephanie. Are we seeing a robust enough response from the United Nations when it comes to the unfolding crisis in Burundi right now?
Well, I think we've seen some attempts by the United Nations to do what it can. It's important in the context of the introduction that you just gave to note that the Burundian opposition has rejected one special mediator. The UN Special Envoy for Central Africa was repudiated by the opposition in May, and now more recently the government has rejected a second UN mediator, Abdoulaye Bathily, who's the special representative for Central Africa, also rejected as a mediator. So both UN mediators shot down. We now have Museveni stepping into the fray, essentially having been nominated by the East African community. I think at this point, what we really need is a strong voice saying that these elections cannot go forward next Tuesday. We have a growing climate of insecurity, massive human rights violations, and a growing number of atrocities that are being committed. Absolutely no fair playing ground for an election to be held. And I think that is the strongest message that the United Nations, but also the African Union and the East African community could send to Burundi at the moment.
Stephanie, are we seeing the beginnings of an armed rebellion against Nkurunziza at this point? We can see right now the army generals are going to keep coming at him until he's gone. For instance, General Leonard Nkendakumana, a leader of that May 13th coup, he's been very straightforward with the press, saying he's not backing down and he will use all the force he can muster at this point.
I think it's still a little bit too early to say that we're likely to see a return to full-scale armed conflict. We don't know what those groups would look like at this stage, and we certainly hope that we can avert that kind of a situation. But certainly, like the statements made by the coup plotters who were defeated on May 13th, there is a sense that the democratic space is no longer open for political contestation, and that in fact the only way to make one's political voice known is by armed opposition. And this, of course, is a long tradition in Burundi. It emerged from civil war only in the early 2000s. In 2005, Pierre Nkurunziza was the first post-war president who was elected. So it has been only 10 years, really, that we've seen stability in Burundi. So very, very worrisome, but perhaps a little bit too early to start ringing those kinds of alarm bells.
Well, after that May 13th coup, we saw President Nkurunziza return home. But he wouldn't have been able to go home without some support from the East African states and the international community. It begs the question, how much of regional support does he really enjoy right now?
Well, it's a very good question. I think one of the things, that we didn't know would happen is that the coup plotters would be defeated. On May 13th, it looked like perhaps they would succeed in ousting Nkurunziza, who, of course, at that very moment was at an East African summit. In fact, the statements coming from the African Union and the East African community were significantly stronger against Nkurunziza before this coup. The coup really seems to have thrown international diplomatic efforts into some disarray. And of course, because there are charters, an African Union charter against the unconstitutional change of power through coups. So the AU couldn't approve that particular way of changing government. Since then, we've really seen a backing down. The East African community has not come out strongly really since then. I think that, suggesting that one could delay the presidential elections by 2 weeks, they were scheduled for the 15th of July. The EAC said, let's hold them at the end of the month, really wasn't a very useful or strong recommendation, given the level of repression and the absence of any kind of real open political space. So I think there is support for Nkurunziza in the East African community. And you must remember that there are other heads of state in that community today who have gone through the same process at home, and Museveni is one of them.
Stephanie Wolters from the Institute of Security Studies, thank you for sharing your insights with us right here on the SABC News Desk.